I'm here today with Jason Trigg, who holds a bachelor's and a master's from MIT. He currently works as a data scientist in Silicon Valley. Jason was a guest this afternoon in the Life Worth Living seminar here at Yale University, and so we're here today to talk about life, about what makes a life worth living. Jason, it's so good to be here with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been good so far.
Great. You know, you've made some life and career choices that have landed you profiled in the Washington Post and critiqued in the New York Times. What's all the fuss about? What do you do, and how have you decided to spend your money? What caused all the fuss?
Okay, yeah, the controversial decision was to go into a job where I could potentially earn a lot of money with the goal of donating that money, and in particular with not so much regard as to what good or what the job does directly. And in particular, I went to work in quantitative finance, and that's often critiqued as not providing much direct social welfare. And so I think that's the contrast is this a choice to work somewhere that people think of as not an especially moral choice, but in the name with an idea that you can maybe even do the most good by going there and donating that money.
And so, what charities do you support? What good are you feeling you're able to accomplish?
So in particular, I've donated to the Against Malaria Foundation, and they distribute insecticide-treated malaria nets in African countries. And in general, I've gotten a lot of help taking advice from an organization called GiveWell that does a lot of analyses of different groups and on a deeper level than has been done before, in that often people are just worried about sort of the percentage of money in a charity that goes to overhead. But these guys are focused a lot more on outcomes and how much do you get for the money that doesn't go to overhead? What are the real results?
And so how do you think about those results? Is this like kind of dollars per life saved, or how do you think about it?
Yeah, dollars per life saved is a great one as long as you're saving lives. But a lot of interventions don't save lives. So one that's pretty good is deworming people. So people who have roundworms or something, you can give them a cheap treatment. I can't remember, something under $1, and to get rid of that. And it makes you healthier in general, but you generally it's not a condition you die of. And so it is tough to weight these things. And often people will talk about a quality adjusted life year is something that people will talk about. And if you can, how many years are you improving? And there's some idea that you go from maybe 0 quality to 1, or maybe from 0 to 0.5, and then a metric that people use is quality adjusted life years, how much quality improvement there was for how long.
So you're actually able to quantify then how much good you're actually doing with $1 donated.
That's the idea. I think it's very tough, and there's a lot of uncertainty involved, but you're still doing your best to figure out which thing is doing the most good.
And this appeals to you, I assume, in part as a computer scientist, as a data analyst. Is that part of the appeal for you? Is this kind of just part of how you view the world, think about the world?
Yeah, I think that, and also maybe an optimizer in general. I think I try to, if I do things, I want to do them the best if possible. And that's, in this case, I'm trying to do my bit of good in the world, and I'd like to work out what way will do the best according to the outcomes I'm trying to create.
So do you feel like that largely came kind of just intrinsically for you, or were there external kind of sources that you looked to, people you read, ideas you heard about that influenced you to kind of choose this path?
Yeah, well, I'd identify broadly as a utilitarian, and I've read Peter Singer is a big name in utilitarianism and modern utilitarianism. So I've read some by him, less of the older John Stuart Mill, Jeremy Bentham, Utilitarianism. I know less of it, but so I've read some of that. But I think also it does come naturally, and that there's that I'm naturally analytical, and I naturally think that I care about other people's happiness, as many people, most everyone does. And so I think it's a somewhat natural synthesis of those two.
So there are two sides of this, right? There's the earn side and there's the give side. And we've talked a bit about the giving side, how you choose strategically to give. How do you think about the earning side? Are you just is it a pure maximization question of make as much as you can? How do you think about kind of selecting the job?
Well, that's a great question, because there is a lot to think about. And one thing is how much you'll earn this year compared to how much this job could earn down the line if it goes well, or how much it'll earn this year and how much flexibility it'll give you if it goes bad to do something else. Or there are a few considerations to be had. I think that I've more operated under a rather short-term short-term earning more. But I think also I've kept in mind that I'd like to be working somewhere with some longer-term flexibility, and hopefully somewhere where career success gives you some status, because I've seen people who have success in industry able to jump over to have success in nonprofits. An extreme example is Bill Gates, but I think it's very common to end up on the boards of certain groups, and I'd like to keep that kind of flexibility open.
Interesting. So, we were talking earlier today. I told you, in years I've spent around this university in particular, the plan that you talk about is a pretty popular plan. I hear plenty of students who talk about, I'm just going to go get a good job, make money as well as I can, and then give it away, invest it in causes that I care about. My sense is often that's more of a popular plan than it is actually a popular lifestyle. How you've been at this for almost 5 years now. What gives you hope that you're not going to kind of wander away from kind of your original intentions here as time goes on?
Yeah, it's. I guess I'm stubborn. It's hard to say. I'm given some hope that I think I'm off to a good start, even though I do feel some. One big concern is that people's just quality of life gradually sort of ratchets up and never seems to go down. Is that people with money often find it harder to give up things than it is to add them, and that's one concern that I feel somewhat as the years go on. I think that's happened to me, and I think it's a valid concern and something that I should look out for going forward and make sure that I'm not losing sight of what I care of in the day-to-day of purchasing things.
Yeah. Do you have any advice, even just at this point, for students, juniors, seniors who are kind of at this point, kind of considering pursuing this plan that might help them actually make good on it if they choose this route?
Well, one interesting thing is a website in a community called Giving What We Can, and there you can make a commitment to donate some amount. I think there's flexibility in the amount, but the general recommended amount is 10% of your salary. And they have a list of people, and then so once you can go on there and you can make this commitment, and then they'll kind of bother you every year to check that you're making it and ask that you verify. And I think this kind of commitment can be helpful. It's not something that I've chosen to do, but a lot of people have, and I think social commitment is one good way, and that might be something that people can try, and many people have tried.
Excellent. In the seminar we talk about life led well, life going well, and life feeling good. These three different dimensions of maybe the good life. clearly it seems like life led well, intentional moral choices rank pretty high for you. It's important to you that you make good decisions that have good consequences in the world. How do you know what the right thing is to do? Like what counts for you in figuring out kind of the right moral action?
What counts for me? So so I've got this background of a utilitarian background, and yeah, so that says that I want to be, generally speaking, increasing people's happiness, and I think that I think I only revisit my decisions occasionally, generally. So in particular, at the end of the year, I'm choosing to donate, but also when I'm choosing to take a new job or making other decisions. I think so for me, it's something that I think about periodically, and yeah, at that time I'll reevaluate. Okay, how am I doing this? Should I be earning money and donating it? Should I be going in more directly doing good? Do I think that might be better? So maybe the answer to your question is, for one thing, it's a kind of a periodic evaluation is how I think about it, but I'm not sure if that's exactly what you meant. And in another sense, it's a fairly analytical kind of calculation. Is how much good do I think this could do? How much good do I think this can do? I'm unsure generally, but take my best guess and try to do what's best.
In that process, how much? So it seems like that ranks highest for you, or that's the goal at least, is to have that rank highest. What room is there then in terms of your personal decision making for thinking about like providing for yourself, or I guess we're thinking largely in economic decisions, buying something for yourself, buying something using money in some sort of way that might make you feel good, or maybe there are non-economic choices. What room is there for kind of being concerned about the material part of your own life, or the kind of affective, emotional part of your life?
Yeah, I find that I don't actively run into this problem too much, in that I'm generally, the affective side, I'm generally basically satisfied with my life, and that when I make the higher level decision, okay, I'm going to go work in finance, then that hasn't come back to bite me in the sense of, oh, this job is terrible. It's really bringing me down. No, I went and worked there, and on a day-to-day basis, it was fine. It was, in fact, it uses the skills, the things that I studied in school, and is challenging. And other than the sort of direct moral outcomes of it, I think it's decent. And so I haven't directly run into that. In terms of the financial purchases, that definitely happens. Anytime you buy something that's not strictly necessary, is that morally justifiable? And I don't beat myself up about that. Generally, I tend to be rather cheap, and so far I haven't run into that too much. And that relates a bit to what we were talking about before, with kind of spending more every year. And I think that's something I might think about more going forward. And I know other people who have similar, earning to give is a term that's used, that are in the earning to give business, who budget how they want to spend a little more carefully to make sure that they keep that in check. And that's how they deal with it. And again, it's something that they can handle in sort of a few decision-making pieces. Okay, this is the budget. And then instead of every single time you purchase something, kind of questioning the moral acceptability of it. So yeah, I guess that's my answer.
Mm-hmm. So there's an ought here in how you think about life, right? You were talking about this earlier today, and you talked about how you said you're not a religious person, but sometimes you feel some connection to religious people because you have this sense of there's an ought to life. There's some things you ought to do, some things one ought not to do. For a religious person, there's often a pretty clear answer then where that comes from. There's some relationship to God or to one's community or to some kind of higher authority, some transcendent reality. Where does the oughtness come from for for you? Like, to whom are you responsible for living this sort of way?
It feels natural to me to care about other people's well-being. I can't think of a time that it wasn't there and then it was infused in me. And I feel like that's true for both religious and non-religious people that I meet. And so for me that comes naturally. And then the question is how to act on it. And in terms of ought, there are different degrees of how much you focus on that and how much you're kind of going about your life. But it feels like a natural thing. And then when combined with an analytical viewpoint, it leads to the kind of decisions that I make.
And so does this then, in terms of, so that's how it works for you, when you think about other people, or where does the ought come from kind of intrapersonally, or interpersonally rather? Are there kind of are these moral standards or moral kind of responsibilities that apply to all people? Do we all have responsibility to be maximizing happiness or maximizing the well-being of all others?
Well, I tend to think of morality more on a spectrum instead of in like ought and ought not dichotomy. And so where there are some of the most impressively morally admirable Gandhis at the top and some of the worst people at the bottom. And I think that it's certainly better to push yourself up that list as much as possible. And I think that it's better for me to do it. I think it's better for everyone to do that. And I'm not sure, when you say it's better and when you say they ought to, there's some semantic discussion there. But I do think that kind of the rules apply to everyone, and everyone sort of, in some sense, should try to move themselves up towards virtue.
Yeah. So several times today in class, in the seminar, we hit on, students kept generating kind of more and more complex questions, right? And you kind of began by saying, I'm a consequentialist, and at the end of the day, kind of what one ought to do or what's better to do has to do with the consequences of your actions, not just your intentions. So it really matters that we know kind of what the consequences are. Well, the more we talked about some of these hairier and hairier kinds of cases, we got to places where it seemed harder and harder to really know in a globalized, connected world, what are the consequences of my actions? A theologian, Karl Rahner, had a famous example of saying, I go to the grocery store and I buy a banana, and I don't realize what the moral consequences might be of buying a banana if the banana's farmed, and harvested in an unjust system. By buying a banana, suddenly I'm participating in a system of oppression. More and more these days, I think we have some intuitions that I don't really know what the consequences are of my actions. It's very hard to know the consequences. How does one kind of deal with that? And you've already alluded to it. There's always a degree of uncertainty in trying to figure out kind of what the consequences are of one's actions. How does one deal with that?
Well, I think for one thing is to maintain that uncertainty. I think I agree with you that it's very difficult to predict some of the follow-on effects to actions. And I think that one response to that is to prioritize to some degree things where you can directly see the benefits. And so that's where something like malaria nets, there is a rather straightforward connection. These people put these nets in the field, the mosquito can't get through the net, just straightforward, they don't get malaria. And whereas if you look at more complicated types of interventions, like something we talked about before would be an intervention that tries to change a political structure in an oppressed state. There's another, to me it seems like there's another couple levels of uncertainty before you get the desirable outcome. And I think it's good to remain sort of worried about a lot of possibilities that you might not reach the desired outcome and maybe other things equal, prefer the bird in the hand, the one that you can see a little more directly because of the uncertainty.
We've talked a lot about kind of global responsibility, and certainly it's one of the features of our world that there is a kind of a very, very wealthy group of nations and nations that are much less wealthy, and increasingly a full spectrum in between as well. And so we've talked a lot about kind of addressing those kinds of global inequalities and and using the wealth of Snowball, what you're doing, using the wealth in a kind of rich Western context and investing it to solve some of the low-hanging fruit, easier to solve problems in the developing world. But a question comes up, and again, it came up with the students. What about the person next door? For the person in this Western context, how does one balance one's responsibility to one's neighbor versus one's responsibility to someone you don't even know, but is in dire poverty or in suffering from disease? Ethicists call this the problem of special relations. Are there particular folks to whom one has more responsibility than to others? How do you think about that? And do you find that you're kind of giving globally? How does that affect your relations right in front of you, or your relationships in the States?
For me, I find that I have special emotional connections to some people that I don't share with people I've never met in developing countries, and I help those people more than a lot. I do donate to some targeted people, but I do. Other than those targeted people, I definitely help the people that are close to me emotionally and physically more than a lot of the other people. And I don't think of that as especially morally better. I think of it as something that I do, and it helps me maintain social bonds with those people, and it's something that I do more for me instead of as part of my pitch into making the world a better place.
Mm-hmm. And how do you balance those two? Lurking in the back of this conversation, right, is Peter Singer, who makes these arguments in very kind of morally demanding terms, right? And so you sometimes, just like the concession you just made quickly there, right? Like, I think about kind of maximizing the world and doing right by the world, and I have these things I do for myself. It seems sometimes, at least, I don't know if I can't speak for him, but it seems sometimes that Singer would say, you shouldn't do that. There's one kind of rational principle by which the whole world should operate. How do you kind of hold those two things together? I'm trying to do right by the world. I also got to cut myself some slack, or maybe it's even appropriate for me to do some things for me, for my friends, for my community, kind of more locally.
I guess I just view it as a falling short of the perfect person, which I fall short of in many ways every day, and some of those are in the calculated utilitarian sense that I spend money on myself, but some of them are in another sense, in that I get angry with somebody, or I don't, I'm inconsiderate, or I forget I'm late, or there are a million ways in which a million failings, and I think everybody has a lot of failings, and I think some of them are going to be in that'll still exist even within the framework of trying to optimize your utilitarian impact. And
how do you deal with those? How do you address those? I mean, this is a universal human problem, right?
Yeah, and I think that I'm not sure that I have any special advice on those, but I think it's good to take that seriously and try to try harder. I mean, I ought to reflect more often on okay, how have I done in the last 3 months? In what ways am I falling short? Could I be doing better? But yeah, I think that most people would agree that nobody's perfect, and I don't think Peter Singer, he donates maybe 25% or 50% of his income, but not 90%. And I don't think he donates himself into poverty. And so I think that, everyone would agree that, you lie somewhere on this spectrum, and you try to, people try to be as good as they can. And
What's the in figuring out kind of how to do this and how to negotiate these consequences or these compromises? Sometimes compromise is a good thing. Sometimes compromise is a worrisome thing. But in negotiating these sorts of kind of where do you draw the line? How do you stay true to commitments that you want to make while also dealing with the fact that you're not perfect? Often community is really, really important in doing that. Have you kind of found that community's been useful for kind of helping support, finding support for yourself in pursuing the kind of life that you've wanted to pursue? Are there effective altruist groups that one can go to? What's the role of community in supporting this sort of life?
I guess at first I came to this mainly on my own, but later, after that article came out, I knew a bit about these groups, but I found it was more prominent than I thought, that people were kind of rallying together with these similar ideas, grabbing the label effective altruist for themselves, and talking about earning to give as a model, and there a lot began in Oxford in England, was a big location for them, and also in Boston and in the Bay Area have some big ones. But I think that Yale has an effective altruist group, for example, and that's one thing these groups are doing is working on showing these ideas to a broader audience.
One of the appealing things, that, speaking of kind of community that can be built along these lines, one of the things that students really found in Mill's work when we were looking at it was that Mill's notes, your motivations for living this sort of life could come from any number of sources. They could come from religious sources. They can come from non-religious sources. What kinds of opportunities do you think are here for this sort of kind of practical altruism, or this effective altruism, to kind of build community across these sorts of ideological bonds or ideological boundaries?
Well, in terms of the subset of effective altruism, this is the way to go, or the people who want to do earning to give. And there are other people who would say, we should be working on researching how to cure malaria. Maybe that's a better strategy if you're good enough at biology than donating money to malaria nets. Right? But within the charity subsection, I think there's a lot to agree on and to admire in the history of tithing, for example, and I think also one of the pillars of Islam is zakat or donation, and I think that I don't know if there are the same traditions in non-religious circles, but I think there's definitely something to learn there for those groups, or for people who work together in donating to useful causes.
So I mentioned at the beginning that you were all of a sudden subject not just of a kind of a positive piece in the Washington Post, but you received some critique from David Brooks, and one of his concerns was that if we live simply in order to earn to give, his concern was, do we end up making ourselves a means rather than an end? Do we become? He said, do we end up making ourselves into kind of fiscal policies? What has been your experience of you've been at this for a while now. What's been your experience? Have you kind of had this? I think he would predict that you'd have this kind of big crisis of meaning or something, right? That you're kind of, why am I going to work every day? Or I've turned myself into a cog in a machine instead of kind of living a full life.
Well, on the contrary, it doesn't feel that different from how my life was before, when I went through 16 years of schooling, and it was mostly about studying material, and I don't really feel like I was creating any social good at the time. And there was quite a lot of that every day for many years, and it feels kind of similar to go do a job, and it again is presenting technical problems. This is similar to what I studied in school, and you work on solving them, and the outcome is again removed, as it is in school where you're sort of planning for some distant future, and here it's also removed in that you're going to earn the money and donate it. But I feel like that isn't such a big deal, and that I think many people have been working towards goals that are far away, and so I didn't feel that much change in that respect.
So as we wrap up, do you have any kind of final thoughts for like I said, a college junior, college senior is kind of thinking about life, trying to make career choices, trying to kind of think about what the next step might be for them. There's only so many. You're pretty close to that place. Only a few years removed from that. Do you have any kind of final advice for them as they're kind of thinking about what next choices they have to take?
Well, yeah, I think that as you kind of mentioned, we are at a rather unique place where the developed countries are really far ahead of developing countries, and there are basic problems there that are most of the way solved, and or very cheap, very low-hanging fruit that we can help with, and that giving charity is very powerful, especially to those groups at this time, and maybe in general to consider a wide variety of immediate ways to achieve your goal, and that for me is working somewhere to earn money to donate instead of more directly working to distribute malaria nets or something. But in general, this idea that there might be a few different ways to achieve the outcomes that you want, and I'd say consider some that are more removed, and also keep in mind that we're at a pretty amazing place in terms of what charity from the developed world can do.
Well, thank you, Jason. I think your comments today in the seminar and have been challenging, and I think opened a lot of eyes in terms of what is possible and kind of what some commitment to the greater good can accomplish. So thank you for sharing your time and your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.